Well, now let us get some expert opinion on the situation in Japan from Christopher Simons, an associate professor at the International Christian University in Tokyo. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Now, what do you think caused the explosion? We've been hearing reports that they were trying to keep the situation under control. They've been monitoring the cooling system. From your perspective, I know we still need more information, but what could have possibly caused that explosion?
Well, it looks like this is caused by the cooling system failing. Now, when the earthquake occurred yesterday at about 2:46, the reactors immediately shut down. But of course, you can't shut down a reactor instantly. It has to keep cooling the reaction that's going on inside it. So these reactors have backup generators which continue to pump water into the reactor. Unfortunately, the backup generators, which are diesel generators at Fukushima Daiichi, seem to have failed after about an hour. And they were running on emergency batteries while the military began moving in more equipment, more electrical equipment to power the cooling. Now, it seems as though it's possible in the last couple of hours that has failed, and the reactor materials, that is the uranium in the reactor, has been exposed to the air. There have been reports that iodine and cesium, both radioactive iodine and cesium, have been detected around the reactor, and that could indicate there's essentially no water left to cool this reaction, and that could have caused the explosion.
Okay, well, can you just explain? We've been saying this since the government announced it, the fear of a possible meltdown. In layman's terms, it's in as simple terms as possible. What is a meltdown?
Well, I've heard you discussing this situation in comparison with Chernobyl. There is a slight difference in terms of the two different types of reactors, and although this situation is quite dangerous, it seems as though hopefully it will not be as serious as Chernobyl. This reactor is cooled entirely by water. A meltdown is simply when the nuclear materials cannot be cooled, and the temperature rises in the containment area and the reactor materials themselves to the point at which they destroy the reactor that surrounds them. Of course, these temperatures have to reach about 500 degrees Celsius for the metal, and for the uranium itself, probably in the order of 800 to 1,000 degrees Celsius. The good news is that in the Daiichi reactor, the Daiichi reactor, the one that has just exploded, the coolant is entirely water, so the material venting into the atmosphere will likely be just steam, radioactive steam. In the case of Chernobyl, the reactor was moderated by graphite, and graphite holds the radiation and spreads much further as dust and gas. So that was the significant problem with Chernobyl. The neutron moderator in that reactor was different, and the radiation could spread much further.
Okay, well, we're getting reports that the roof of the reactor has now collapsed. Now, just to give us an idea, for those of us who've never seen a reactor, when the roof of a reactor collapses, what exactly does that mean? Does that mean that the whole facility is breached, that the core of the reactor there has been breached, is in danger?
Not necessarily. Now, you have to remember that at the Daiichi site, there are, I believe, 6 active reactors, all of which have shut down. And again, I don't have all the information, but at the moment it appears as though reactor building number 1 is the site of the explosion. Now, this is the oldest of the 6 reactors at Daiichi. It was built in 1979. So it suggests that the oldest structure on the site was also the weakest, and that this explosion has possibly exposed the uranium in the reactor to the air, but it doesn't mean that the situation is necessarily out of control. As long as the government and the military can supply cooling materials, that is electrical power, to drive pressurized water into the reactor building, hopefully some of the venting can still be contained. In other words, if the roof has collapsed, it could mean that some steam has escaped, or it could mean that the situation is out of control, and as the reactor core cools, any water pumped into it will continue to turn into radioactive steam and vent into the atmosphere. So we don't know. It could be quite a dangerous situation. As you said, the safety limit has been expanded from 10 kilometers to 20 kilometers. People are being advised to stay in their homes, not drink water, turn off their air conditioners. So it sounds like the government is preparing people for a significant nuclear event.
You just said that people were asked to not drink water. Then what are their options there? You mean tap water? Is that what we're seeing?
That's right. That's right. That suggests that the government is taking precautions, but it seems as though they're suggesting that as the radioactive steam, which is venting from building number 1, cools in the atmosphere. Of course, it's night now. As that steam condenses into liquid water, it will enter the water supply, carrying radioactive iodine and cesium isotopes with it. Which could contaminate people in the vicinity. At last report, the radiation in the vicinity was approximately 1,000 microsieverts, and that is about as much radiation as a human body should absorb in 1 year, and that's being released every hour. So it seems like the radiation levels in the vicinity of the reactor are quite high.
Okay, well, given that that is the level at the moment, just how dangerous is that? Let's just put it into the context of the health of a person. Someone who is exposed to that kind of radiation in such a short period of time, what are the damage, the health damage that could come out of that?
Well, the biological effects will depend on a number of factors. Of course, the sievert is a measure of biological impact rather than just nuclear energy. So, for example, if you are a larger person, you have a larger body mass absorbing that same amount of radiation. That suggests that the most vulnerable people will be children and the elderly, people with a smaller body mass or more weaker body. I believe that measure of 1,000 microsieverts was quite close to the reactor. So obviously the main concern is for emergency workers, firefighters, and military in the area. People further away are probably not at so great a risk. Of course, the radiation is carried by particles in the air, but diminishes geometrically with distance. So hopefully the levels 10 kilometers away or 20 kilometers away are not nearly as high at the moment.
Well, what about the precautions that people can take? We're trying to get as many insights as possible. So the government has asked the public to wear masks, stay indoors. Is that enough? What else should people be doing? The easiest thing that they can do within their homes, perhaps, it's to protect themselves if radiation levels do get out of control.
Yes, well, the government seems to be giving very good advice. Of course, the difficulty, again, is the difference between the type of material being vented. Here at Daiichi, the likelihood is it is mostly steam. In Chernobyl, these vaporized graphite would have materialized as dust or affected people as dust. So staying inside would have been the best option. The same applies to Daiichi, but of course, if the water condenses and enters the water supply, it will make it undrinkable. So people wearing masks, keeping their doors and windows shut, and keeping their air circulation systems, such as heating and air conditioners, switched off, is about all you can do. I mean, the government has given excellent advice in that situation. There really isn't anything else you can do. If radiation levels are high, the government, as you mentioned, will administer anti-radiation medications such as iodine.
Okay, and now let's talk about what the government is doing. Earlier, you mentioned that there is still a chance to contain the damage at the Fukushima power plants. But looking at pictures, you see an explosion. It seems massive. Let's put it into perspective. What else can the government do? How have they been handling this, and what else can they do? Is it going to be an issue of manpower? Is it going to be an issue of machinery? What does it entail to contain something like this?
Yes, well, that is an excellent question. It's difficult to answer without knowing exactly what's happening on the ground. The military and the firefighters who are in the vicinity working on this problem are certainly specially trained to deal with this kind of emergency. I can imagine, I can speculate that they are attempting to cool the remaining reactor core using high-pressure water. If the roof of the building is off, then that water will simply vaporize into radioactive steam. The amount of water required to cool the reactor core would be significant. So there simply seem to be two options. One is to continue trying to deliver water to that reactor core, and the second is simply to evacuate as many people as possible. So obviously, unfortunately, the emergency workers in the vicinity will be receiving quite dangerous levels of radiation. At this point, the best thing that the public can do, or the government can do for the public, is to move people as far away as possible.
Okay, well, we have the whole world watching what's going on in Japan. Memories of Chernobyl come up and have been repeated. Now, what is the effect for the rest of the world? Some have been mentioning it's an issue of the wind carrying radiation, the seas being contaminated. What exactly is the impact, the implication of such a disaster on the rest of the world?
Well, hopefully, first of all, hopefully this disaster will be, compared to Chernobyl, a relatively, we can hope, a relatively small-scale disaster. As I mentioned, only one out of the 6 reactors at Fukushima Daiichi seems to have exploded, or not the reactor itself, but the building around it, probably due to the buildup of high-pressure steam. Yes, of course, depending on the prevailing winds, and the sea conditions, that radiation will be carried elsewhere in the world. I don't want to speculate without having more facts, but I would personally like to be cautiously optimistic that, given the nature of this reactor, given the fact that it is a light water, boiling water reactor cooled only by water, that this radioactive material will either not be carried too far, or that the effects of the damage will be contained, and this will not be a situation comparable to Chernobyl, when radioactive dust clouds reached Europe and North America.
All right, well, you're there living in Tokyo.